Did you know that a lagoon is a shallow lake that is connected to the ocean?
And now we're going to learn about Lake Worth Lagoon right here in Florida. People do all kinds of things at Lake Worth Lagoon. Kayaking, fishing, boating, and Sunfest too. Why don't we go take a look?
We went fishing there.
We rode the paddle boats.
Jet skis are cool.
My dad took me boating.
I think we're canoeing over to the island, so we'll all be walking around the island, so we'll all be picking up trash. That's good.
So how many of you have been to Lake Worth Lagoon? You in the back? You up here in the front?
Wait, how about them?
Are they raising their hands?
Yeah.
I guess so. So a few of you have been there and done lots of cool things. But how many of you haven't been there or don't know where it is?
Well, for those of you way in the back who haven't been to Lake Worth Lagoon, you are in for a rare treat. And for those of you who have, I can tell you some things that you have never known before.
I'm JR.
And I'm Sandy.
And today we're going to be taking you on a tour in and around Lake Worth Lagoon. And here we are at Lake Worth Lagoon.
Well, not to be confused with the city of Lake Worth, all this has often been called Lake Worth, or the Intercoastal Waterway. But these are all different names for one body of water that borders much of Palm Beach County. And there it is on your map, right there.
I'll bet you didn't know that. Lake Worth Lagoon is about 22 miles long and about a half-mile wide. It starts near Juneau Beach to the north and continues south to Boynton Beach. It was named after General William Worth in the mid-1800s, the same person that Fort Worth, Texas is named after. Just in case you're curious about what a lagoon is, it's a shallow lake that's connected to the ocean, so its water will be somewhat salty or brackish.
And how did it form? Well, I'm glad you asked. Lake Worth was formed about 120,000 years ago during the Pleistocene, when mastodons roamed the area. Barrier islands trapped the water behind it, forming a lake. Storms occasionally opened or closed the passage to the ocean. As recently as the 1880s, Lake Worth Lagoon contained fresh water. It had 8 natural islands, including Hypoluxo Island, Bingham Island, and Munyon Island. Indians, like the Tequesta and Jaga tribes, first settled this area thousands of years ago. Unfortunately, many of these Indians died from diseases like smallpox that were brought by the Europeans. Centuries later, through the 1800s, Seminole Indians lived near Lake Worth. Before the Civil War, the Seminoles were known to welcome runaway slaves into the tribe. White settlers trickled into the area starting in the 1860s when this body of water could be seen from the Jupiter Lighthouse. Lake Worth also played an important role in the route of the Barefoot Mailman.
One of the Barefoot Mailman is here with us today. He's going to tell us what this area was like back then. Let's take a step back in time.
First postmaster in the area was Mr. Valerius O. Spencer. He worked out of an area now known as Singer Island. The first postmistress was Mrs. Fanny James. She was a black Seminole Indian, and she worked out of the area now known as the city of Lake Worth. There were no trains or roads in the 1880s. Mail from the north was brought by boat to the Jupiter Inlet and carried across land to Juneau Beach. It was ferried by boat to the 7 mail stations along the lake. Men were hired by the U.S. government to continue the route by foot from the southern end of the lagoon along the beach to Biscayne Bay. They were provided with boats for the crossing of the inlets to and from Miami, occasionally bringing back a young gator for dinner. Local plants provided a lot of the basics that the Indians and early settlers need. Cypress trees and palm fronds to build homes, Spanish bayonet for needle and thread, wax myrtle for candles, sea grapes made great jelly, and frayed mangrove twigs served as toothbrushes. Pineapples were an early crop and became a welcome gift to new residents.
Thank you very much. You know, it's hard to imagine that just 100 years ago, you might walk through here and see a 6-foot black bear, some deer, or a Florida panther the size of a Great Dane. By 1887, a stable inlet was established for boat passage, and the freshwater lake began to change to a saltwater lagoon system. By the early 1900s, a lot of changes had occurred. Cypress swamps and sawgrasses were replaced by mangrove forests. The Lake Worth Inlet was deepened and widened. The Intercoastal Waterway provided a boat channel from Key Biscayne to the Indian River Lagoon, and the South Lake Worth Inlet was open near Boynton Beach. As the lake bottom was dredged, a series of spoil islands were formed from the piles of sediment. Examples of these spoil islands are Peanut Island,
Near the Lake Worth Inlet,
and Bird Island,
formerly known as Beer Can Island.
near the Boynton Inlet.
Railroads and roads made life easier for local residents and tourists. Resorts like the Royal Poinciana Hotel, the Hygeia Hotel Health Resort on Munyon Island, the Lake Worth Casino in Bath, and the Breakers Hotel all fit into the lifestyles of the rich and famous. Beginning in the 1920s, newly made canals drained wetlands that allowed development in the farming to the west, which continues today. These canals increased the fresh water that poured into the lagoon. The changes in water flow and the dumping of pollutants and raw sewage into the lagoon resulted in pretty nasty water by the 1940s. A massive cleanup effort started in the 1960s, and to date, little sewage is discharged into the lagoon.
How disgusting, JR. I don't even understand how anything could live in this water.
Well, the water quality of the lagoon has improved in recent years, but it's still polluted. And it is surprising how some plants and animals can survive and have adapted to this water.
You know, it's sad that there's not as many fish out there as there used to be, and some species have just died out entirely.
Later, we'll take a look at some of the natural communities that make up the lagoon.
So we've talked about what a lagoon is.
That's a shallow lake that connects to the ocean.
Yeah, but did you know that Lake Worth Lagoon is also an estuary?
Oh, sounds like I need a little help from the experts on this one.
I think so.
An estuary is a coastal aquatic environment where freshwater and saltwater mix.
An estuary is right before you. It's a semi-enclosed coastal body of water with free access to the open ocean that receives freshwater runoff from the land.
Lake Worth Lagoon provides an estuarine habitat. An estuary, for us, is a cradle of the ocean, meaning it provides nursery habitat for all the fishery species out in the ocean. This is kind of where it all begins.
What's coming up next is a salt wedge demonstration, which is showing what happens when you mix fresh and salt water. Let me go on over. Come on.
What I have in these two containers are, one is full of salt water, and the blue color is full of fresh water. And we're going to do an experiment that demonstrates what happens when they mix in an estuary environment. Who has an idea of what happens out there and what will happen in this tank?
Salt water stay on the bottom more because it's denser because of the salt?
We have an idea that the salt water might stay at the bottom because it's denser than fresh water. Does anybody agree with that? It's a good hypothesis. No? What do you think? You think it's going to mix real quick? Okay. I need someone to come up here and please pour that blue water into one side. You can do that. And if somebody wants to come up and pour the salt, what color is the salt water? We need to remember this. Yellow is the salt, fresh is the blue. All right, also we want to remember what color does yellow and blue make when they mix? Green. Green, right. It's a good thing to remember. You might need to note that. But right now they're not mixing, right? So what I am going to do is pull up the separator in the middle, and I need for you all to watch very closely at what happens. Ready? Yes. Salt water went to the bottom, and the fresh water did what? Went to the top. Why does that happen? Salt water is denser than fresh water, and that happens all over the world wherever there's an estuary environment.
You may wonder how fresh water gets into the lagoon.
About half of the fresh water that enters the lagoon comes from miles and miles of canals that connect to this canal, the C51. It drains stormwater from our neighborhoods and also as far away as Lake Okeechobee.
Now that's a lot of water. The salt water, on the other hand, flows in and out with the tide through the inlets.
But before we go to the tidal area, we have to review food chains and food webs.
That's a good idea. I'm a little rusty on that. How about you?
Me too. In any habitat or ecosystem, food webs show the trophic or nutrition pathways between plants and animals. These feeding relationships transfer energy from one level to another. Plants are the producers. They convert energy from the sun and carbon dioxide into food in the form of carbohydrates. Plants give off oxygen, which animals need to breathe. Depending where you are in the estuary, producers may be mangrove trees, seagrasses, algae, or microscopic plants called phytoplankton.
Animals are the consumers, and they feed in different ways. Those that eat plants are called herbivores, including oysters, some fish, manatees, and even green sea turtles. Animals that prey on other animals are called carnivores. Examples are seahorses, many fish, birds, and even raccoons. Then there are the detritivores. They eat detritus, or scraps of dead plants and animals. Examples are crabs, conchs, and worms.
The last group of organisms to complete the cycle are the decomposers. Decomposers, like fungi and bacteria, are very important, especially in the estuary. They break down plant and animal matter and recycle the nutrients into the soil. These nutrients keep the plants healthy so that they can make more food for the animals.
Now, just to review, let's build a food web. And so, the web is woven by various feeding relationships. All living things in the web are dependent on one another. MacArthur Beach State Park is one of the great places that provides educational programs for a lot of different age groups.
Let's eavesdrop on one of those, an estuary walk.
Ooh.
What kind of mangrove is that with those wonderful prop roots that come down?
Red.
Red, it's a red mangrove. The way you can always tell a red mangrove is it has these wonderful prop roots, aerial roots that come out, and the wood is red. That's why they call it a red mangrove. They have these prop roots to help aerate or oxygenate the tree, and also for support, because this is muddy, yucky, sticky soil, and it's very hard for the trees to stand up in it, so that is for support. All mangrove trees have to get rid of the salt that they take in this salty water. If you would go to the beach and polish off a glass of seawater, you wouldn't feel real well. It would probably make you sick. It would dry your mouth out and begin to dehydrate you. So all of the trees that live in these mudflats have to be able to get rid of the excess the salt water. The red mangrove filters out the salt from its prop roots by a process called reverse osmosis. And you can always tell a black mangrove because the leaves are somewhat whitish on the back. That's a little bit of a paradox. But the black mangrove gets rid of its excess salt by excreting it on the bottom and the top surface of the leaf. If I put it in the sunshine, you might be able to see the salt crystals sparkling on it. Of course, that's just me telling you it's salt crystals. The only way you can really tell for sure is to taste it. So would you lick that leaf on the upper surface? Ah. Good. That's the black mangrove. The white mangrove, which we'll see farther down the way, probably excretes the salt from little pores at the base of the leaf. Now, when people first came to Florida, they looked out on this estuary and some similar to this and said, man, this is disgusting. The sediment stinks. It smells like rotten eggs. Look at all those ugly plants around there, and nothing's eating those plants. So let's just fill in this part and build houses and seawalls and cut down the mangroves. Unfortunately, when they cut down the mangroves, it also cut off the food supply for the estuary. Mangroves are useful primarily in their dead state than in their live state. The leaves fall off the tree and they begin to decompose, and the leaves get all covered with bacteria and fungus. And tiny animals come along and eat the bacteria and fungus from the leaves, and other larger animals eat those. I'm going to show you an example of some of the smaller animals that are detritus feeders. That is feeding on the rotting mangrove leaves and seagrasses. Take a good handful of the sediment, really quick, dig way down deep, and then pick it up and smell it. What does it smell like?
Good.
Sulfur. What else? Does it smell a little like sewage? Most people say it smells like sewage. This is wonderful, delicious, abundant food for the animals. This is the decomposing plant and animal material. And if you look carefully in front of you where the sun is shining, you'll see that the earth is moving. All of this whole sediment is covered with animal life, and all of these animals are dining on this delicious meal.
Some detritus feeders that we saw were worms, fiddler crabs, a spider crab, a brittle star, and many horseshoe crabs. Some organisms like conchs eat both small animals and detritus. Conch egg cases look like coins. This protects them during development. Seining allows you to sample some of the animals living in the shallow water and hiding in the seagrasses. We found all kinds of things like pinfish, shrimp, and pufferfish.
Imagine bringing up this many fish and shrimp and egg cases in one seine hall. Imagine how abundant this whole area is. And these are small fish, which provide food for bigger fish, which provide food for even bigger fish, birds, and people. And that is the reason that we should preserve and save and protect our estuaries, because they truly feed the world.
Seagrasses form a submerged grassy meadow. They grow in shallow, brackish water up to 10 feet deep. Seagrasses provide nursery grounds for many fish and marine animals. When these animals get big enough, they stand a better chance of survival against their predators in deeper waters and out at sea.
We have a number of seagrasses in Lake Worth Lagoon. We have Syringodium, which is also called manatee grass, which is a sort of a green spaghetti-like looking grass. We have Thalassia, which is also called turtle grass, which is sort of like a tape. It's a wide-bladed grass. And then the predominant shallow water grasses that we have are shoal grass or Cuban shoal weed, also called halidule. And this grass is grows kind of thin and hair-like. And then we have paddle grass or Halophila. And we have two species of Halophila. We have Johnson's seagrass, which is Halophila johnsoni, listed as a threatened species by the federal government. And we have paddle grass, and these are small grasses, have leaf blades that are shaped like a paddle, only about a half an inch to an inch in length, and they grow along the bottom and make sort of a carpet on the bottom in shallow water, shallow clear water.
One of the largest grazers of seagrasses are manatees. They are sometimes called sea cows because they graze on underwater meadows like cows feed in the pastures. West Indian manatee is a native to Florida and is closely related to the elephant. The average adult is about 10 feet long and weighs about 1,000 pounds. During cold weather, they often hang out in the warm waters near the power plant.
Because they are mammals, manatees breathe air, usually taking a breath every 2 to 5 minutes. They move very slowly, about 2 to 5 miles per hour, making it difficult for a manatee to dart a fast-moving boat. Excessive hunting of manatees for meat and hide resulted in laws to protect them. Today, boating collisions are their greatest threat. Manatees eat 70 to 100 pounds of seagrass per day. This makes the protection of seagrasses even more important, to protect the food source for this already endangered species.
Did you know that in deeper waters, Palm Beach County has placed artificial reefs to increase fish habitat and productivity?
I didn't.
Pyramid-shaped modules and hundreds of tons of limestone rock and concrete have been placed in the lagoon. Within 6 months, what starts out as a surface for coral and sponges is covered with them, and voila, new fish habitat.
Some artificial reefs attract specific types of fish and invertebrates, like grouper, snook, and crawfish. Artificial reefs take pressure off the natural reefs and provide a hangout for juvenile fish as they prepare for the grown-up world of the open sea.
It's a real jungle out there.
Food chains within the reefs and deeper waters have plankton as the producers. A variety of consumers, from corals to barracuda, and crawfish serve as the detritivores. The reefs are monitored by a team of researchers who take underwater footage like this as they monitor the progress and uses of these artificial reefs. It's good to see that the efforts to improve the habitat are working, at least for the artificial reefs.
Yeah, JR, but what are the key elements that threaten the wildlife of Lake Worth Lagoon?
Sandy, I'm glad you asked. One of the key elements is water quality. If you think back to the food web idea, plants or producers use light to photosynthesize and make food for the animals.
If seagrasses aren't in an area to begin with, normally there's a reason why, and it's usually related to bad water quality. When you clean up the water and the light is able to penetrate further down, you can get tremendous growth of seagrasses coming in on their own.
Poor water quality has caused seagrass meadows to die off dramatically over the past several decades. While seagrasses have begun to recover since the 1970s, they are still only 58% of what they were in the 1940s.
You know, I think I saw a group of high school students over there testing the water in the lagoon. Why don't we go see what they're up to?
No problem.
When you talk about water quality, you talk about many things. And there are many different parameters you can test. We usually test just 3 or 4 of them, the most important ones for this body of water, which is an estuary.
What are you looking for?
It's a blue line that goes in there and it shows you how much salinity there is in the water.
Okay.
It's 24. Usual ocean water is 36, so it shows you how the fresh water is coming in, and there's not as much salt in this water as there would be in the ocean.
Checking for oxygen in the water is like doing a pool test. A darker color means there's more oxygen available for the animals.
Spanish mackerel is an interesting fish to talk about when you talk about the Lake Worth Lagoon. We had tremendous runs of Spanish mackerel and bluefish in the 40s and 50s. The reason the fish came in the lagoon was that there was an abundant supply of food there, glass minnow, shrimp, that are supported by a healthy system, a healthy estuary, seagrass beds, oysters, mangroves. And when we altered that system, that got rid of a lot of the reasons for the bluefish and Spanish mackerel to come in the lake, which was food. Even though the fish populations are healthy once again when we talk about Spanish mackerel, they still don't come in the Lake Worth Lagoon because we simply don't have the habitat.
So how do farms and homeowners impact the lagoon?
Sandy, today about 250 square miles of Palm Beach County drains to the lagoon. Within that 250 square miles, any excess nutrients that are generated from farm operations or nutrients that are generated from fertilizing our individual backyards, sediments from our streets, all of that has the potential to move to the lagoon.
How much water do the major canals feed into the lagoon?
Just to give you a little bit of perspective, one of those canals discharging after a major storm event can put out 2 million gallons a minute of water into the lagoon. That's about the equivalent of 2 swimming pools every second discharged into the lagoon. About 30 years ago, there was 10 million gallons a day of raw sewage being dumped into Lake Worth. Today, all of that wastewater is treated in treatment plants and is diverted away from the lagoon.
Another big problem with the Lake Worth Lagoon is the loss of habitat. More than 85% of the mangroves have been lost due to the seawalls and development. And yet 70% of sport and commercial fish depend on these habitats.
So Palm Beach County has started to restore mangroves and tidal habitat. One really good example is Munyon Island.
That's right.
Munyon Island is very special in the fact that it's one of our original islands. And granted, it was spoiled upon, but we have taken that spoiled material and we believe we've turned it into something very functional. Now, when they dug the intercoastal waterway, they deposited the material on and around the island, bringing the elevations up at least by 6 feet. Now that area was subsequently colonized by Australian pine and other exotic vegetation such as seaside mayho and Brazilian pepper. Now the problem with that is that it was really an uninhabitable island. The animals couldn't use it, the birds couldn't utilize it, and it certainly wasn't any good for the fisheries. So what we've tried to do with this area is take that spoil material. We had to first of all remove the exotic vegetation, and there were 30 acres of of Australian pine, and what we did with that Australian pine is we chipped it here on site and we utilized it on the original island. We had to reduce the elevations by dropping the elevations back down to tidal elevations. So we had to take off about 6 to 8 feet of spoil material, and we took that material and we put it back into Lake Worth Lagoon. Now with Munyon Island, we're promoting this area as a fisheries habitat because in the estuaries, the estuaries are known to be the cradles of the ocean, meaning that they are where everything begins. They're the nursery habitat for the oceanic system. They're kind of a stepping stone for a lot of species.
There are thousands of registered boaters in Palm Beach County. They create problems whether they know it or not.
Well, boats can do a lot of damage to manatees. If people don't obey the speed zones in manatee areas, they can have a collision with the manatee, which can cause obviously a great deal of damage from the propeller and the hull of the boat. They also can cause damage to manatees by actually paying too much attention to them, by trying to feed them, by trying to give them water from a hose. These are all terrible things for manatees. It changes their natural behavior and causes them to go towards humans more as opposed to staying away from them, which is part of their natural protection from us and from boats. Environmental protection is everybody's job. We're all stewards of the environment. We all inherited this environment, and each of us has to take care of it, whether it's by not throwing trash in the water, by making sure our outboard engines are running efficiently and not putting oil into the water, or by just watching out for manatees and watching out for the seagrass beds. So these are all very important things to do to protect the environment.
Sometimes boats sink and are left behind. Local officials are trying to remedy this.
Anglers can impact wildlife too. Hooks, fishing line, discarded bones, and bags can be eaten by animals, causing injury and death.
You know, Sandy, volunteers have planted thousands of mangroves on Munyon Island.
Well, JR, other things we can do are reduce the amount of fertilizers and pesticides we use and avoid overwatering. Lawns don't need to be watered every day.
Every year, there are beach cleanup days. This is another way we, as citizens, can make a difference. You, too, can be a volunteer.
And the beautiful Palm Beaches does cleanups throughout the entire year at different times. This is one of their major cleanups where they're concentrating on the entire lagoon and on the beach.
We got some tires, inner tube, some what looks like wire conduit, thick rubber conduit, styrofoam, a couple of cans, a lot of glass, and hundreds of yards of fishing line. Well, the fishing line wraps around mangroves or can ensnare turtles and fish and choke them and prevent them from growing. The plastic bags, when they're floating in the water, look like jellyfish, and turtles will ingest them as part of their diet. And then it clogs up their intestinal system, so they'll die. Just whatever toxic stuff might have been in the tires and the cans and the antifreeze bottles and things like that is just poison, just plain poison.
Birds, snakes, whatever that's in the area that gets in their digestive tract or whatever, can be harmful. Plastic, styrofoam, all that is very hard on the animals and the birds and the fish. People don't care because it's not in their yard. Because, if it's not in their line of sight, people don't care. And it's really important. These pristine areas need to be protected and stuff for the birds, the animals.
We hope you do come to visit Lake Worth Lagoon and enjoy what nature has to offer.
And you have to remember that what you do here can affect the plants and animals that live here. So our goal is to improve and not upset the fragile ecosystems.
So from all of us here at Lake Worth Lagoon,
see you later.